What happens when one of Hollywood's most famously calm and diplomatic actors finds himself pushed into a tense political conversation on live television? And what happens when that actor decides he's not going to simply smile and move on? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. Whoopi Goldberg smiled as the audience applauded. Welcome back, everybody. We are joined today by the incredibly talented Tom Hiddleston. The audience cheered louder as Tom walked onto the stage. Tom smiled warmly and waved. Thank you. Thank you very much. Joy Behar immediately jumped in. You know, every time you come here, people react like you've just saved the world. The audience laughed. Tom chuckled. I think they're just being kind. Sunny Hostin smiled. Or maybe they're big fans. Tom nodded. That sounds more realistic. The audience laughed again. The conversation started comfortably. They discussed Tom's latest project, filming schedules, and his experiences working with different casts. Everything felt relaxed. Then Alyssa Farah Griffin leaned forward. Tom, one thing I've always found interesting about you is that you've managed to stay fairly diplomatic in a world where celebrities are constantly expected to weigh in on political issues. Tom smiled politely. Well, I think everyone has their own approach. Alyssa nodded. But don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with having such a large platform? Tom paused. I think responsibility comes in many forms. What does that mean? Alyssa asked. Tom remained calm. It means different people contribute in different ways. Some are activists. Some focus on charitable work. Some try to encourage empathy through storytelling. Alyssa tilted her head. But isn't that avoiding the question? The audience became quieter. Tom laughed lightly. I wasn't trying to. No, but seriously, Alyssa continued. We're living in a time where major issues affect millions of people. Do celebrities sometimes hide behind the idea of being entertainers because they don't want to take difficult positions? The audience reacted with a few scattered murmurs. Tom sat back slightly. I don't know that I'd characterize it that way. Alyssa immediately followed up. Why not? Because I think it's possible to care deeply about issues without making every public appearance a political statement. The audience applauded. Alyssa smiled. But that's easy to say when you're not being pressured. Tom's expression remained friendly. I think everyone experiences pressure differently. Joy jumped in. I actually agree with Tom there. The audience laughed. Joy pointed toward Alyssa. See, it happens once every few years. More laughter. Alyssa smiled but wasn't backing down. I'm not criticizing him. I'm genuinely curious. Tom nodded. And that's fair. She continued. Because from the outside, sometimes it looks like celebrities benefit from public attention, but become uncomfortable when that attention comes with expectations. Tom considered the comment. I understand why some people feel that way. The audience listened carefully. But I think there's a danger in assuming that visibility automatically creates expertise. A few audience members applauded. Tom continued. If someone spends years studying policy, economics, law, diplomacy, healthcare, that expertise matters. Alyssa crossed her arms. So actors should stay in their lane? Tom immediately shook his head. No, that's not what I said. But that's what a lot of people hear. Tom smiled. That's because we're reducing a complicated conversation into a slogan. The audience reacted with noticeable approval. Whoopi raised her eyebrows. That's a good point. Alyssa leaned forward again. But let me challenge you on that. Tom nodded. Please. If a public figure has influence over millions of people, isn't silence also a statement? The room became noticeably quieter. Tom took a moment before answering. Sometimes. Alyssa quickly jumped in. So then choosing not to speak can have consequences. Tom nodded. Of course. Then why avoid it? Tom smiled slightly. You're assuming avoidance. The audience responded with an audible, oh. Alyssa looked surprised. Tom continued calmly. I didn't say people shouldn't speak. I said people should decide thoughtfully when and how they speak. The audience applauded. Sunny nodded. There's a difference. Tom continued. I've always believed that listening is an important part of public conversation. Alyssa answered quickly. But listening doesn't solve problems. Tom nodded. Neither does shouting. The audience erupted into applause. Even Joy laughed. Okay, that's a good one. Tom laughed too. Alyssa smiled but looked determined. Fair enough. She paused. But let me ask something more directly. Tom nodded. Go ahead. You've built a reputation as one of the nicest people in Hollywood. The audience applauded. Tom laughed. I hope that's true. But do you ever worry that being nice prevents honest disagreement? Tom looked genuinely interested. No. Why not? Because kindness and disagreement aren't opposites. The audience applauded again. Tom continued. I think we've created this idea that being passionate means being hostile. Whoopi nodded. Uh-huh. Tom looked toward the panel. You can disagree strongly with someone while still respecting them. The audience applauded. Alyssa smiled. That's easy to say. Tom chuckled. You're saying that a lot today. The audience laughed. Even Alyssa laughed. Because I'm challenging you. And I appreciate it. The exchange remained friendly, but viewers could feel something changing. The conversation was becoming sharper. Less promotional. More personal. Alyssa leaned forward again. Then let me challenge you one more time. The audience grew quiet. Tom nodded. Go ahead. She took a breath. Do you think people in entertainment sometimes get praised for sounding thoughtful without actually saying anything concrete? The audience reacted instantly. Some gasped. Some laughed. Joy's eyes widened. Whoopi looked over at Alyssa. Tom smiled. But this time, the smile was different. Still polite. Still controlled. But noticeably firmer. For the first time in the interview, he leaned forward. You know what's interesting about that question? Alyssa looked directly at him. What? Tom kept smiling. I think sometimes people confuse nuance with avoidance. The audience applauded. Alyssa opened her mouth to respond. Tom continued. And sometimes people confuse certainty with wisdom. The audience suddenly erupted. Loud applause filled the studio. Whoopi sat back in her chair. Joy looked impressed. Sunny raised her eyebrows. Alyssa smiled tightly. Okay. Tom remained calm. No, seriously. The audience quieted. Tom continued. The pressure to have an immediate answer for every issue can create the illusion of clarity. Alyssa looked unconvinced. But people want clarity. Tom nodded. I understand that. Then give it to them. The audience reacted again. Whoopi looked toward Tom. The entire table suddenly felt more tense. For the first time all morning, the discussion wasn't about movies. It wasn't about promotion. It wasn't even about politics anymore. It was about whether Tom Hiddleston was willing to defend the way he approaches public debate. And judging by the look on his face, he was just getting started. The audience remained quiet as Tom looked across the table. Alyssa sat forward, waiting. Tom nodded slowly. You said people want clarity. I did. And I understand why. Alyssa gestured toward him. So give us some. Tom smiled. I think clarity is important. But I also think certainty can be dangerous when someone doesn't fully understand an issue. The audience applauded lightly. Alyssa shook her head. But isn't that what public discussion is for? Nobody expects every actor to be a policy expert. Tom nodded. Agreed. So why the hesitation? Tom answered immediately. Because influence matters. Alyssa looked confused. What does that mean? It means if millions of people are listening to you, you should be careful about what you present as fact. The audience applauded. Sunny nodded. That's fair. Tom continued. I've seen situations where public conversations become competitions. Competitions? Alyssa asked. Who can react first? Who can be the loudest? Who can generate the biggest headline? The audience laughed. Joy pointed toward the audience. He's not wrong. More laughter followed. Alyssa smiled. But headlines aren't always bad. No, Tom agreed. But they aren't always productive either. The audience responded with applause. Whoopi jumped in. I think what he's saying is that not every issue fits into a 30-second answer. Tom nodded. Exactly. Alyssa looked toward Whoopi. But television works that way. Whoopi laughed. Believe me, I know. The audience laughed with her. Alyssa turned back to Tom. Okay, but let me ask this. Tom nodded. Sure. You've talked about empathy several times. I have. Do you think empathy has become a substitute for action? The audience reacted immediately. Tom looked thoughtful. I don't. Why not? Because empathy is usually where action begins. The audience applauded. Alyssa shook her head slightly. But lots of people claim empathy. Tom nodded. That's true. And then nothing changes. Tom leaned forward. That's also true. The audience quieted again. Tom continued. But the existence of insincere empathy doesn't make genuine empathy worthless. Several audience members applauded. Sunny smiled. That's a good distinction. Tom nodded appreciatively. Alyssa wasn't finished. But do you understand why people get frustrated? Absolutely. You do. Of course. The audience listened closely. Tom continued. People feel unheard. People feel ignored. People feel like powerful institutions don't listen. Alyssa nodded. Exactly. And those frustrations are real. The audience applauded. For a moment, it looked as though the two were finally finding common ground. Then Alyssa asked another question. Then why do so many celebrities seem uncomfortable when they're challenged? The audience reacted again. Joy laughed. Oh boy. Tom smiled. I can only speak for myself. That's fair. Tom nodded. I don't mind being challenged. Alyssa immediately replied. Really? The audience laughed. Tom laughed too. You're challenging me right now. And we're having a conversation. The audience applauded. Alyssa smiled. But some people would say you're giving polished answers. Tom looked amused. Would they? Absolutely. The audience laughed. Tom nodded. Okay. Alyssa continued. They'd say you're very skilled at sounding reasonable. Joy burst out laughing. Oh, she's coming for you today. The audience laughed loudly. Tom laughed as well. Apparently. Alyssa smiled. I'm serious. So am I. The audience quieted. Tom continued. I think there's an interesting assumption behind that criticism. What assumption? That sounding reasonable is somehow suspicious. The audience applauded. Alyssa opened her hands. Not suspicious. Strategic. Tom nodded. Maybe. The audience watched carefully. Tom continued. But should we prefer unreasonable conversations? Alyssa laughed despite herself. No. Then I'm not sure what the criticism is. The audience erupted into applause. Whoopi leaned back in her chair. He's got a point. Alyssa smiled but quickly answered. The criticism is that sometimes public figures become so careful that nobody knows what they actually believe. The audience murmured. Tom took a breath. That's a legitimate concern. Alyssa looked surprised by the answer. It is. Certainly. The audience listened closely. Tom continued. I think authenticity matters. So tell us what you really think. The audience reacted instantly. Sunny laughed. There it is. Tom smiled. There it is. The audience laughed. Alyssa folded her arms. Well, Tom paused. What exactly would you like me to think about? The audience laughed again. Alyssa smiled. See, that's what I mean. Tom laughed. No, genuinely. The audience settled. Tom continued. We're talking about responsibility, public influence, political engagement, media culture. He gestured lightly. Those are different subjects. Alyssa nodded. Fair. Tom continued. I believe people should participate in civic life. The audience applauded. I believe disagreement is healthy. More applause. I believe facts matter. The applause grew louder. And I believe human beings are more complicated than political labels. The audience erupted again. Whoopi nodded. Uh-huh. Tom looked toward Alyssa. Those aren't particularly controversial positions. Alyssa smiled. No, they're not. But they're honestly what I believe. The audience applauded. Then Alyssa asked the question that changed the energy again. Do you think the media contributes to division? The audience immediately reacted. Whoopi's eyebrows rose. Joy looked over at Alyssa. Sunny shifted in her seat. Tom noticed the reaction. That's a complicated question. Alyssa smiled. Complicated seems to be your favorite word. The audience laughed. Tom grinned. Life keeps giving me complicated questions. More laughter. Alyssa pressed on. But answer it. Tom nodded. Sometimes, yes. The audience grew quiet. Alyssa looked interested. Explain. Tom sat forward. I think media can inform people. The audience nodded. I think media can educate people. More nods. And I think media can occasionally reward conflict. The audience reacted with scattered applause. Joy laughed loudly. Occasionally, the audience exploded with laughter. Tom laughed too. Fair correction. Whoopi covered her face laughing. Alyssa smiled. So you think conflict gets rewarded? Sometimes. And that's a problem? Tom nodded. It can be. The audience listened carefully. Tom continued. Because disagreement can be constructive. Alyssa nodded. Sure. But conflict for its own sake rarely is. The audience applauded. Alyssa looked directly at him. So are we having a constructive disagreement right now? Tom smiled. I think so. The audience applauded. Alyssa shook her head with a grin. Really? Absolutely. The audience laughed. Alyssa pointed at him. Because some viewers probably think you're avoiding every question I've asked. The room reacted immediately. Tom's smile faded slightly. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just enough for everyone to notice. The audience became very quiet. Tom looked directly at Alyssa. Then, for the first time all segment, he answered without any trace of humor. I think that's an unfair characterization. The audience let out a collective whoa. Whoopi looked from Alyssa to Tom. Sunny sat up straighter. Joy stopped smiling. Alyssa raised her eyebrows. Tom remained calm, but his tone had clearly changed. I've answered every question you've asked. The audience applauded loudly. Alyssa looked surprised. Tom continued. You may disagree with my answers. The applause continued. You may wish my answers were different. Even louder applause. But disagreeing with an answer is not the same thing as not receiving one. The audience erupted. For the first time during the interview, Alyssa found herself momentarily speechless. And everyone in the studio could feel that the conversation had just entered a very different phase. The applause continued for several seconds. Tom sat back in his chair and waited. Alyssa nodded slowly. Okay. The audience quieted. I'll give you that. Tom smiled politely. Thank you. But I still think there's a difference between answering a question and addressing the concern behind the question. The audience murmured. Tom considered that for a moment. That's fair. Alyssa seemed encouraged. So let's talk about the concern. Let's. The audience leaned in. Alyssa continued. I think a lot of people feel exhausted. Tom nodded. I understand. They feel like powerful people get endless opportunities to explain themselves while ordinary people don't. The audience applauded. Tom listened carefully. They see celebrities, politicians, media figures, all these people with enormous platforms, and they wonder whether accountability is applied equally. Tom nodded again. That's a valid concern. The audience applauded. Alyssa looked surprised. You agree? Of course. Then where do we disagree? Tom smiled. I think we disagree on the assumption that every public conversation must become a courtroom. The audience reacted immediately. Several people applauded. Joy leaned forward. That's interesting. Tom continued. I think accountability matters. The audience nodded. I think criticism matters. More applause. But I also think curiosity matters. Sunny nodded. Explain that. Tom turned toward her. I think we've become very quick to decide what someone's intentions are. The audience listened closely. We assume motives. Alyssa nodded slightly. We assign labels. The audience remained quiet. And then we argue with those assumptions instead of the actual person sitting in front of us. Several audience members applauded. Whoopi pointed toward Tom. That happens every day. Tom nodded. It does. Alyssa folded her arms. But intentions aren't everything. No. Impact matters too. Tom immediately agreed. Absolutely. The audience seemed surprised by how quickly he answered. Tom continued. Impact matters enormously. Alyssa leaned forward. So if impact matters, why focus so much on nuance? Tom smiled slightly. Because impact and nuance aren't enemies. The audience applauded. Alyssa shook her head. Most people don't see it that way. Tom nodded. I know. Why? Because outrage is simpler. The audience reacted loudly. Whoopi let out a laugh. Joy shook her head. He's collecting applause today. The audience laughed. Tom smiled. I'm not trying to. Alyssa responded immediately. But do you see how that answer sounds? Tom looked at her. How? Like you're saying people are too emotional. The audience reacted. Tom quickly shook his head. No, that's what some people hear. Tom paused. Then he answered carefully. I think emotions are important. The audience listened. I think anger can be justified. A few audience members applauded. I think frustration can be justified. More applause. I think disappointment can be justified. The audience nodded. But I don't think emotions automatically make every conclusion correct. The audience erupted into applause. Sunny smiled. That's probably true for everybody. Tom nodded. Exactly. Alyssa sat back. For the first time all segment, she seemed to be thinking rather than preparing her next challenge. Whoopi noticed it too. She smiled. You know what's funny? The audience laughed. What? Alyssa asked. Whoopi pointed between them. Neither of you actually disagrees as much as you think. The audience applauded. Tom laughed. Alyssa smiled. Maybe. Whoopi continued. You're arguing about methods. The audience listened. Not values. Tom nodded. I think that's probably true. Alyssa looked at him. Maybe. Joy laughed. That's the most agreement we've had all day. The audience laughed. But then Alyssa asked another question. And immediately the mood shifted again. Tom, do you think public figures are treated unfairly by the media? The audience reacted. Tom looked thoughtful. Sometimes. Alyssa raised an eyebrow. Sometimes. Sometimes. The audience laughed. Alyssa smiled. There it is again. Tom laughed. That's my answer. The audience laughed with him. Alyssa continued. Okay, let's make it more specific. Tom nodded. Sure. Do you think interviews are designed to create conflict? The audience immediately became quieter. Whoopi glanced toward Alyssa. Joy looked interested. Sunny waited for the answer. Tom looked around the table. Then he smiled. Some are. The audience erupted with laughter. Alyssa laughed too. You really won't make this easy. Tom grinned. I'm answering honestly. The audience applauded. Alyssa pointed toward him. Do you think this interview is trying to create conflict? The audience let out a collective gasp. Whoopi laughed. Oh, now we're doing it. Tom smiled. The audience waited. Tom took a breath. Then he answered. I think this interview is trying to create television. The audience exploded. Whoopi burst out laughing. Joy nearly doubled over. Sunny covered her face. Even Alyssa laughed. The applause continued for several moments. Tom smiled patiently. Then he added, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The audience applauded again. Alyssa nodded. Fair answer. Tom continued. People watch discussions because discussions are interesting. The audience listened. They watch disagreement because disagreement can reveal something. Alyssa nodded. Exactly. Tom smiled. But only if both people are genuinely listening. The audience applauded. The atmosphere softened slightly. Then Alyssa leaned forward one more time. Can I be honest? Tom smiled. I hope so. The audience laughed. Alyssa laughed too. Then she became serious. I think some viewers will watch this and say you've handled every question perfectly. Tom listened. And I think other viewers will watch this and say you've spent 30 minutes avoiding commitment. The audience reacted. Tom nodded. That's possible. Alyssa looked surprised again. You're okay with that? Tom paused. Then he gave the answer that would become the most talked about moment of the entire interview. I'm okay with people disagreeing with me. The audience grew quiet. Tom continued. What concerns me is when disagreement becomes a substitute for understanding. The room became silent. Even the audience stopped reacting. Tom wasn't speaking loudly. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to win. But every person in the studio was listening. Tom looked directly at Alyssa. I don't need everyone to agree with me. The audience remained silent. I don't even expect it. He smiled slightly. But if we're going to challenge each other, and we should, we owe each other enough respect to hear the answer before deciding it wasn't good enough. The audience erupted into the loudest applause of the day. People stood. Several audience members rose to their feet. Whoopi nodded repeatedly. Sunny applauded. Joy applauded. Even Alyssa was clapping. Tom looked genuinely embarrassed by the reaction. He laughed and shook his head. Please sit down. The audience laughed. But the energy in the studio had completely changed. What started as a challenging interview was now becoming something else. A conversation about conversation itself. And with only a few minutes left before the end of the segment, everyone at the table knew the most important exchange was still coming. The applause slowly settled. Tom smiled awkwardly as audience members returned to their seats. Whoopi looked around the table. Well, this got a little deeper than I expected this morning. The audience laughed. Tom nodded. So did I. More laughter followed. Alyssa smiled. I promise I wasn't trying to start a war. Tom laughed. I never thought you were. The audience responded warmly. Whoopi pointed between them. Good. Because social media is probably already writing headlines. The audience erupted with laughter. Joy jumped in. Probably. More laughter. Sunny shook her head. It's definitely happening. Tom smiled. That's beyond my control. Alyssa laughed. Mine too. The atmosphere felt noticeably lighter than it had earlier. The tension that had built throughout the discussion had begun to fade. But the audience remained fully engaged. Whoopi turned to Tom. Before we wrap up, let me ask you something. Tom nodded. Sure. What do you hope people take away from conversations like this? The audience became quiet again. Tom thought for a moment. Then he answered. I hope people become more comfortable disagreeing without assuming the worst about each other. Several audience members applauded. Tom continued, I think we've reached a point where disagreement often feels personal. The audience listened carefully. And sometimes it shouldn't be. Sunny nodded. That's true. Tom smiled. I've enjoyed this conversation. Alyssa laughed. Even the difficult parts? Tom looked at her. Especially the difficult parts. The audience applauded. Alyssa smiled. That's a very diplomatic answer. Tom laughed. There it is again. The audience laughed with him. Joy pointed at Alyssa. You've used that word about 50 times today. More laughter filled the studio. Alyssa shrugged. Maybe. Whoopi smiled. But honestly, this is what the show is supposed to be. The audience applauded. People don't have to agree. More applause. They just have to be willing to talk. The audience responded with another round of applause. Tom nodded appreciatively. I completely agree. As the segment neared its end, the mood in the studio felt completely different from where it had started. The earlier tension had transformed into mutual respect. Viewers could see that neither side had fully changed the other's mind. But both had remained engaged. Both had continued listening. And neither had walked away from the discussion. Whoopi looked toward the camera. We're going to take a quick break. The audience applauded. But first, let's thank Tom Hiddleston for joining us. The audience erupted into cheers. Tom stood and waved. The host stood as well. Alyssa extended her hand. Tom immediately shook it. The audience noticed. And they applauded even louder. Joy laughed. Look at that. Nobody got thrown off the stage. The audience roared with laughter. Tom hugged Whoopi, exchanged a few final words with Sunny, and thanked the audience before leaving the stage. As the cameras pulled away, viewers could still see members of the audience talking animatedly among themselves. The conversation had clearly made an impression. And once the show ended, the discussion didn't stop. In fact, it only grew bigger. Within minutes, clips from the interview began spreading across social media. One clip focused on Tom's response. Disagreeing with an answer is not the same thing as not receiving one. Another clip highlighted his comment. Sometimes people confuse certainty with wisdom. A third clip quickly gained traction after viewers shared his remark. I think this interview is trying to create television. Thousands of comments appeared across multiple platforms. Some viewers praised Tom's calm approach. Many described him as thoughtful, measured, and respectful under pressure. Others argued that Alyssa had asked important questions and deserved credit for challenging him. Many viewers said the discussion worked precisely because neither side backed down. Comment sections quickly filled with debate. Some people felt Tom had delivered a masterclass in handling difficult interviews. Others insisted Alyssa had successfully pushed him to explain his views more clearly. Several media commentators discussed the exchange during the following days. Clips continued circulating online. Reaction videos appeared. Talk show fans debated who had made the stronger arguments. What most people agreed on, however, was that the conversation never crossed the line into hostility. It remained tense. It remained challenging. But it stayed respectful. According to audience members who later discussed the taping online, the atmosphere inside the studio felt even more intense than what viewers saw at home. Several people described moments where the audience became so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Others said the standing ovation near the end happened naturally and surprised many people in attendance. Meanwhile, neither Tom nor Alyssa publicly criticized the other after the show. No angry statements appeared. No public feud followed. Instead, the interview became an example of how disagreement can still produce meaningful conversation. And that may have been the most surprising outcome of all. A discussion that began with tough questions, challenging exchanges, and visible tension ultimately ended with mutual respect, a handshake, and an audience that remained engaged until the very last second. As viewers continued debating the interview online, one thing became clear. The conversation had accomplished exactly what live television hopes to accomplish. People were still talking about it long after the cameras stopped rolling. And now we want to hear from you. Did Tom Hiddleston make the stronger case? Did Alyssa Farah Griffin ask the tougher questions? Or do you think both sides handled the conversation well? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.